interpretation. We go from facts to interpretation at light speed. We don't even realize we're doing it. And that interpretation creates judgment. It creates a stick-to-itiveness when it comes to your point of view. It pushes us to close our ears to what the other person is saying in preparation for what we're going to say. So all these things happen as a result of us not really being present in the conversation. And that creates conflict. It creates a feeling like I got to steel myself to go into this conversation. And that's part of what makes it awkward, because you're steeling yourself for a fight, or you're ready to get skewered, whatever it might be. You're anticipating a certain outcome, a certain feeling to happen. And so that's why people often avoid these conversations, or they're just not handled in the best possible way.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys. So Natasha, I'm going to run a poll here while you kind of tell us what you think, in your experience, are the toughest conversations to have, like your the ones that are your top 1, 2, or 3 for you that are the toughest, most awkward conversations to have, while we find out what everybody else thinks.
Yeah, so based on my experience, there are 3 areas that get people really antsy and uncomfortable. Particularly, I would say, when a company's scaling, or when a company is having challenges. So the first one is diversity in a company. So how do I explain to a candidate or to an employee, having conversations about DEI, what a company is or isn't doing? That can often be difficult for people to sort of really engage in dialogue on. The other topic that you'll see in the poll here is when you are a recruiter needing to tell a hiring manager that they're not adding to the process, or if you're a hiring manager or a people partner, an HR business partner, talking to a recruiter about what's not working. And then there are those employer team performance issues or challenges where people will often let it go until you're ready to explode, and it's just too much. And so, because in many of these cases, we either are deer in headlights and stop in our tracks, or we just avoid, or third option is we go in with the tough part and go straight to the hard reaction. Those can be there. And I see in our poll, I see where we've landed. So thank you, Stacy, for highlighting that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Chris, give us a story. You're a great storyteller. So tell us your most awkward conversation story in your tenured history in this world.
So it was my first job in recruiting. I was just a few months out of college. This was 22 years ago. So I was just coming back from lunch with a coworker who had been in the recruiting space for a couple decades, and we got on an elevator, and it's a long elevator ride, and the first thing she says to a fellow passenger in the elevator is, "When are you due?" And when she says, "I'm not pregnant," so I already cringed with the question. And then when the woman said, "I'm not pregnant," that was the most uncomfortable 24 floors I have ever experienced in my entire life. My coworker, she was red in the face and looked like she was ready to cry. The person that she had asked the question of was so uncomfortable, and you could tell that she was hurt. And I'm a super empathetic person, and I felt every bit of the awkwardness that was going on because of who I was. I also went through training at Sears. I worked in the kids department through high school and college. And part of the training was, you don't ask a woman when she's due. You don't there are certain questions and certain topics you just don't bring up. Politics, religion, certain things you just don't bring up with strangers. They trained us on these things. And when we got off the elevator, she said, "I don't understand." My coworker didn't understand what she had done wrong. And so I had to kind of, as the new guy, I didn't know if I could have this conversation, but she obviously needed to have it, and I needed to help her understand what happened. So we walked through all these different things that had happened, and why she felt the way she did, why the woman in the elevator felt the way she did. But here I was, the junior guy, trying to tell somebody that's senior to me what she had done. And I don't want to use the word wrong, because she was using the word wrong. You just don't do it. These are things that you just don't, conversations you just don't have, and unless you know the person. And so that was 22 years later. And I'm awkward. I've had tons of awkward conversations, but that is the one that sticks out the most, because there's so many different awkward layers to that conversation.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
thank you so much for sharing that. You know, it's a challenging story and difficult, and it is actually a really great example of what makes conversations like these so hard to have. So there are a few elements that I want to share that make things awkward and difficult. One is, first, differences of opinions, right? So when two people bring different opinions to the table, it is challenge. Like, there's an inherent challenge right there. The second thing is when emotions run high. So in this story that you shared, Chris, you're feeling like, oh, goodness gracious, I'm new. This person is much more senior to me. And they're visibly upset. They need to get things out. They need to talk. And I feel compelled to have this conversation. And it's high stakes, right? So in your situation, like in many, there's a power differential. And we can't underestimate the impact of having that power differential. What often happens when we're in those situations is we share the conclusions, right? We share our point of view. Here's my perspective. Here's my opinion. But we don't get into the path. We don't talk about how we reach that conclusion. We don't talk about the experiences or insights or knowledge or reading, or we don't bring that to the table in the beginning. We go straight to our headline, our conclusion. And so what ends up happening is, if you share a different point of view, what do? I advocate even more, right? I go even further, deeper, and become more deeply entrenched in my conclusions. And so what happens is, at that point, what happens? We leave the conversation feeling very frustrated, so there's a little bit of fight or flight, right? So I either get into it further, or I'm dropping it, forget it.
Yeah. Well, in this case, she couldn't understand why it was a problem, like why she couldn't ask that question. And I said, well, you don't know her. You made an assumption. It was wrong. And she just kept saying, but this, but that. And I said, but take a step back. She wasn't pregnant. You hurt her feelings. You know you hurt her feelings. If you see her again in the elevator, she probably works in this building. You're going to need to apologize. You know, you didn't do anything. Like, you keep thinking in terms of right or wrong. It's like what you did just wasn't nice.
There's an impact, and an opportunity in the moment could have been to apologize immediately, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I apologize.
It was shut down.
Right. And it can be very hard to do that, because what's happening is your own values, how your identity, how you believe you show up in the world is challenged in that moment. I think I'm a great person. I think I'm very considerate. I think I'm very nice. I think I'm thoughtful. And now you're telling me that I did something that hurt somebody's feeling. That's not thoughtful. And that clashes with my view of myself. Right.
Yeah,
so it's hard for me to hear that feedback from you.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a neighbor who, you know, means well, will say he's not a racist, but he didn't understand when he was talking to a neighbor who is of Chinese heritage. Mm-hmm. And he says, you know, where are you from? You know, the neighbor said, you know, where are you from? And he goes, Canada. No, but where are you really from? I love your food. I love Chinese food. And that neighbor doesn't talk to him anymore. And I had to explain to him why. And luckily he took the feedback, and he did actually apologize, and now they're friends again.
Oh, Chris, you are a great mediator. I love that. Natasha,
I love that you spoke up and you said something, and somebody put in the chat microaggressions. And yes, we would call that microaggressions. I will say, though, some people would just say that's an aggression. Take the micro out of it. It hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts.
And we do encourage everybody to put your thoughts in the chat or questions or something specific for us to evaluate. We're watching that chat and happy to have this be as interactive as possible. So Natasha, you kind of explained to us why those conversations are so awkward, particularly those ones surrounding performance, which was our number one conversation in the poll that was the most difficult for folks. So what are some of the recommendations you have? You've given us the why of how to better have those conversations, and if you could maybe tell us specific to that performance, since that seemed to be one of the biggest challenges for our audience today, that would be great.
Sure. There are two approaches you can take when you're faced with a conversation that's difficult. One is you can say, I need some time to process. I'd like to come back to you. It is perfectly fine to do that if you're not ready. And I don't think we should be embarrassed to do that. The thing is, we have to come back, right? We have to say, I'd like to sleep on it. Can I come back to you? When can we schedule the time? So don't take that extra step, basically. Take the extra step to find the time, make the time, commit to it before you leave that conversation. The other is to engage in the moment. Right. And one of the biggest recommendations I can make is you probably have an inkling of when you're going to have a difficult conversation. It's, I need to set up a meeting with you and things have sort of been going downhill, right? So what I would recommend highly is preparing. Prepare for the conversation. Identify where you might have those differences of opinion. Identify what you're feeling, what you think the other person is feeling. Name it. And then talk about your purpose, your agenda. What is it that you want to have be the end result of this conversation? And don't get caught up in the win-lose cycle that, on my point of view, that person has to agree with me. No, the intention here is to understand the facts, all of the lenses and filters that we put on those facts to help us interpret the biases, the knowledge, the experiences. Because if we don't acknowledge and actually name some of those filters and biases and lenses, that's where we, start working across each other instead of with each other.
And Natasha, on that, there's also, when you are doing that the preparation in advance of what you expect to be an awkward conversation, how do you coach people on what happens when things do escalate? When you do see someone getting defensive or things are starting to go down the path of anger and unhelpful emotion. Like, how do you recommend doing that? How do you put the
timeout? You call a timeout, and there you have to look for ways to do that without insulting the other person, because especially when the other person's emotions are running high, it's not the time to say, calm down.
Yeah.
But you know how often we say that? I've said it to my kids, calm down. What am I thinking? Don't ever say calm down to somebody whose emotions are running high.
It just makes it worse.
It absolutely does. What you could say is, I think maybe we need to take a break. I see this is really important to you. Mm-hmm. So I want to set up time for us to come back together and dig in on this and continue the conversation. But I think we may need to let's just take a break. Let's come back.
Yeah,
and not accuse somebody of taking things personally, or that's another one, right?
I've done that. And the thing is, I've done that personally. I've said, you need to stop taking these things so personally. Well, evidently that person has heard that their entire life. And I didn't know. And when the reaction happened, it was greater than I expected. And so I did. I stopped the conversation, and we picked it up later. And I asked, well, what could I have done differently? How could I have communicated differently to where it wouldn't put you in a position where you would have such a negative response? Like, what did I do wrong? And ultimately that person and I, we have a much better relationship now. We now have better conflict resolution now. Mm-hmm. And I think it made it, by pausing, coming back to it later, and then asking, what did I do to trigger it? I didn't ask it in that way, but how did I trigger that negative reaction? And we were able to really improve our working relationship, and also just the overall effectiveness of our conversations.
100%. And I know, like Robert mentioned, calling in versus calling out, right? Kimberly mentioned acknowledging. That acknowledgement is so important. And let's not do it in a way that says, Chris, I see you're really upset. I mean,
I'm not upset. You know, we're going to do a role play later, but that's usually the response. I'm not upset. I am upset now that you think I'm upset.
well, so this is where using language like, I see this really matters to you, or I see this is really important to you. It's important to me too. Let's come back to it. I really want some time to think. And so I love that the conversation that's going on in the chat right now, that people are thinking about and sharing ideas on what to say, what not to say, and some resources as well. But Chris, let's give our audience a little treat here, and let's do an actual situation, shall we?
And so just to give everybody an idea, this actually happened, and this happens all the time in recruiting and HR. So I'm going to be the hiring manager, and Natasha, you're going to be. Do you want to play the role? Are you going to play the role of a recruiter, HR, or kind of both?
I'll be the recruiter / whatever. It's fine.
Okay.
So let me share a little bit about the scenario. And Chris, I know you're going to put the whole acting thing going on. Just, you know, we only have a few minutes left. But here's the situation, everybody. So a top-notch candidate has dropped out of the process. Okay, it's a recruitment conversation that we're going to have. And the candidate said, don't think it's a good culture for me. Not interested in proceeding. Now, the hiring manager, Chris, I knew as the recruiter that he rescheduled twice with this candidate. And when I followed up with the candidate, I found out that when he finally did the interview, guess what? He did it from the car. The call dropped multiple times. And he had to dial in several times to get back into the conversation. So the candidate experience was just poor all over the place. So now here's Chris, and he's not happy with the search process. And he just read my note about the candidate withdrawing, and he asked to speak with me. So I've taken a few minutes to prepare for this conversation, and I'm ready for my Zoom call with Chris.
Natasha, where are my candidates? I need them. This role has been open for 2 months. I've only had a handful of conversations with candidates, and I don't even understand this candidate that just dropped out. They were fantastic. The candidate was awesome, but you know, why I don't know what's going on. Yeah,
Chris, you know, one of the things I think we want to keep doing is having these syncs where we're connecting and talking about the roles and how your search is progressing. In this situation, this candidate had some pretty specific feedback for us, and I know this role is high priority for you, and these candidates are really hard to attract to companies anywhere. They just don't leave, and they don't like recruiting. They don't like being recruited. This candidate had some very specific feedback for us. May I share it with you?
Yes, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I was too. So I actually reached out to the candidate and spoke to them myself because the feedback came through the coordinator. Look, the feedback that came back was that they didn't feel that the culture was a good match for them. What was interesting is when I spoke with Taylor, I asked why. What were the signals? What were the challenges? And one of the things that they brought up was this the rescheduling that had to happen as part of getting the interview on schedule with you.
But the thing is, both times that happened, I had the CEO, ask me to do something for them, and I had to drop it, and I had to reprioritize.
Yeah, I understand those competing priorities. I think the way it came through, text message on the phone, not really knowing who you were, or the context. I think not having the context made Taylor feel like they didn't matter.
But this job is fantastic. We're growing as a company. This role would be a game changer for Taylor. I don't understand why that was a problem.
There are a couple of things that I think we ought to consider. First, we have to make sure our candidates feel like they really matter, that they're really wanted. And I think we could have done better on that. And you can also rely on me, right? So if that sort of thing happens, we can also figure out how I can step in for you to communicate. And you can also provide context to the candidates. The other thing though to keep in mind is, I mean, you know, this is a really hard job to recruit for. It's really difficult to attract candidates. And so they're evaluating us almost a bit more than we're evaluating them. And you know, too, it's a small community in this particular function. So word gets around. So we want to make sure that how we treat our candidates, it shows up really well, even the ones we reject, that they serve as ambassadors for us. And I'm a little bit nervous that word on the street isn't so positive about us right now, even though the company is growing really fast and there's a lot of upside. I think we have some work to do on the candidate experience.
Well, what are some of the things that I can, should I be carving out time on my calendar that nobody can book? Or what are some of the things that I could be doing a little bit differently?
Well, that can really help, but I also know that that can be really hard to manage, particularly as we're scaling, right? That you have to step in and plug holes. It happens. I think to the extent that we can give context to our candidates, or we can, if there is time scheduled for an interview, to really protect that. So to have your EA know that nothing can get in the way of that, because you're not going to be freed up until you have your people on board. And that's what I want to make sure happens. I'm invested in making sure you're successful. And that means that we have to really partner closely in your searches. So I don't think you have my cell phone number. I'm going to give you my number. If something like that happens again, text me. We will tag team to make sure that candidate feels like they're treated like gold.
Okay. That's actually how we resolved it. Ultimately, we put, when there was a conflict or an emergent situation, I was notified so that I could get on a call with the candidate as quickly as possible. Ultimately, we got that job filled, and the candidate experience, was improved, and we were able to start moving the needle on the Glassdoor reviews, which usually when you create bad situation, people can go to Glassdoor, and then you have to have awkward conversations because of those Glassdoor reviews.
Yeah. So we could have gone into different directions in this conversation. Obviously, like 2 months and the job isn't filled. Well, is that a realistic timeline? Was that covered in the initial search kickoff? We could have gone in multiple directions here. But like Chris, I've actually called candidates to apologize for a bad candidate experience on behalf of the company, because it was just not up to, frankly, my standards. And so that's also not an easy conversation to have, to reach out to a candidate knowing that they could be making notes, they could be recording your conversation for all you know, it could end up on Glassdoor, social media, and you want to show that you really care. And so that actually is the bottom line here. If we engage in these conversations with the idea of really caring, that makes the difference. And guess what, we have a choice. We can choose to care, or we can choose to treat the conversation like a transaction. And when you choose to treat the conversation like a transaction, that's usually when you don't build connection and relationship.
That's when you take the empathy out. You're taking the empathy out, and in recruiting and HR, it's people. People are empathetic. People have feelings. People have, expectations, communicated and uncommunicated. So it all comes back to, keeping the empathy and sympathy going.
And this is so true for our managers, our leaders, how we treat each other as colleagues, how we show up when we show that there's empathy, when we show that there's care. It has such a vast impact on the dialogue and staying in dialogue, which means two, right? As opposed to monologue, which is those I'm fighting and advocating for my conclusion to win.
Yeah, it's that right versus wrong, when it actually is, it's what is and what isn't. It's that kind of dichotomy that when people start thinking in terms of right and wrong, you get defensive, and the conversations can go sideways quickly. So, well, Stacey, I think I see a question in the chat.
I had one earlier that I wanted to kind of go back to, I think, Chris, from your neighborhood story, and everybody really appreciates the real world applications that you are offering here. So just kind of back to some of the cultural and ethnicity differences. We had someone in combination with trying to have a conversation with a superior, which I think you demonstrated in the role play as well. This is a combination of those two issues. Is handling when a manager or supervisor addresses you by different names every time they engage with you. It seems like this attendee is of Indian descent, and it says the supervisor is confused with Indian names. So they want to obviously be known by their correct name, but feel awkward in telling their supervisor that. Natasha?
Oh, that's not an easy one. And there are different angles you could take. So one approach might be to say, I know that sometimes names can be confusing, so I just wanted to pronounce my name for you. So you could do that, take that approach if your name is a little bit more challenging to pronounce for the person that you're dealing with. The other is to just remind somebody, just a reminder, I know there's a lot going on. My name is Natasha.
Yeah, and one of the other ways to help, is spell it phonetically. Like write, break it down into the syllables so that especially if it's I've seen Polish names. The CZ is pronounced as a letter, as a ch sound. Well, not everyone knows that, and so they'll say kazia, they'll say kaz instead. So, but if you spell it out phonetically and get them to repeat it a couple times with the phonetic spelling, it can also help.
And I just want to acknowledge, and first of all, thank you for that, Chris. That's really very important. I also just want to acknowledge that names are really important. It is a sign of respect. It's a sign of recognition of someone's identity. And so it's very natural for someone to feel not great about being called the wrong name or mispronunciation when you've done it several times. And so I hope these tips have helped.
Yes.
Yeah, and Daniela, thank you. There's actually part of the interview process was to record a pronunciation of her name. So that is very progressive. That is awesome, because that makes it easy for me as the interviewer to get it right the first time.
Sure. We have one more question. It is 11:30. I do want to acknowledge that. We did promise to keep this really brief to 30 minutes. So if you have to drop off, we totally understand. This was recorded, and I will be sending out an email to everybody tomorrow if somebody wanted to share it with their peers and colleagues. And thank you so much for that. And we did have one other question. So if you're still on, we did want to try to get to this as briefly as can. Probably this could go on for 10 minutes, but Megan asked about awkward conversations around personal conduct or hygiene.
My recommendation is always be very fact-based. So be very fact-based. I had a colleague years ago, who's actually also a classmate of mine from undergrad, who was asked to talk to an employee who had body odor. And so he did, and he very professionally, considering he was also pretty junior in his career. I think we were just out of graduate school. He said, it's come to my attention that there are body odor issues, and I wanted to talk to you about how we can help with that. Right. And it was not a getting into health and wellness and overstepping a line, but rather than beat around, dance around the challenge or sort of over talk, he spoke very briefly and spent most of the time listening.
And do it in private. Not out in the open.
150%.
Yeah, you got to have it in a private situation and make sure that, and sometimes, and in the instances where I've had to have that conversation, I've set the stage. This is going to be a little awkward, but you have done nothing wrong. This is not a disciplinary issue. This is not a performance issue. And, I made that clear up front. And so that I could set the stage that, you don't have to get defensive. This isn't about performance. This is really just, we need to have a conversation about something that's a bit more personal.
Yeah. I just want to address one thing in the chat, Stacy. Someone has said, I'm not sure I agree with having to spell my name phonetically. I understand that. I think that can work very well when you're in a group setting and you're meeting a bunch of new people at the same time, and you can ask everybody to spell their surnames or their names phonetically. It sort of levels the playing field a little bit. The other thing that I would say too is if you aren't sure about how to pronounce somebody's name, just ask, right? So I've worked with global organizations for almost my entire career. And so I will ask, and then I'll say, did I say that right? And they'll say yes or no. And I say, it's important to me that I say your name the way you want it to be said. So, or not even for me, just it's important that I say your name the way I want it to be said. It is a very important sign of respect.
Yeah.
So
It's the audio versus visual learners. And so some people, if you start to notice that somebody just, repeatedly say it over and over again, I don't say usually go right to the phonetic spelling. That's usually where, if you've repeatedly said it, sometimes you might have to write it down phonetically so that they can visually see how your name is pronounced, and hopefully it'll get cemented, because there are audio learners, visual learners.
Yes, absolutely. I asked Natasha Kehimkar if I was pronouncing her last name correct before we even got started today. And then I made a phonetic note for myself so that I would ensure that I said it correctly when we were live. So that is certainly an ongoing challenge. I think it's a universal challenge in the global society that we live in. And we don't want it to have to be awkward. We're going to run. Megan, I know your question about hygiene is ongoing. If it doesn't get any better and colleagues still complain, I think that we will certainly take that to heart and talk about what our next topic will be.
And Megan, you can actually find me on LinkedIn, and we'll grab some time to talk through it.
Thank you, Chris, for that offer. That is really, really nice of you. So we really want to continue to help everybody with those challenges. So this will be an ongoing series. We'll let you know if we do it next month or we do it every other month, and try to talk through over the next few courses some of those different awkward situations you find yourselves in, and just lean on us and get some support out there in the community. So with that, it is recorded. We'll shoot that out to y'all tomorrow. I really appreciate you being here. Have a great end of the week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Natasha.
thank you. Bye,
Stacey.
everybody.